Three 6-year-old triplets lose their mom and encounter for the first time a man they've never seen before. Weeks later, they learn the shocking truth about him and about themselves. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching us from. The morning of the funeral was cloaked in a quiet that felt too heavy for a town so small. Even the trees along the narrow road that led to the cemetery seemed subdued, their branches still beneath the gray, unyielding sky. Cold settled deep into the bones of those who gathered, and it seemed no one had spoken above a murmur since they'd arrived. The ground was damp beneath their shoes, still soft from the rain that had passed during the night. It clung to heels and pant cuffs, making the air smell of wet earth and decay. The three little girls stood side by side, dressed identically in woolen black coats that swallowed their slender frames, with matching gray scarves wrapped twice around their necks. They were quiet, not out of discipline, but out of confusion. Mourning was not yet something they understood, not truly. The woman they had called Mommy all their lives was now resting in the long wooden box before them, surrounded by flowers that would wither by sunset. But the finality of that truth remained elusive, floating somewhere above their understanding like fog on a windowpane. Kira, the boldest of the three, stood stiffly, her hands curled into the fabric of her coat pockets, eyes fixed on the casket without blinking. Laya, always watchful and inward, glanced from face to face among the attendees, her mind working behind quiet eyes. Naomi, the dreamer, twisted the hem of her dress between her fingers, her eyes not on the casket but turned upward toward the swaying treetops, as if something might descend and carry her away. The adults whispered around them. A few paused to pat their heads, to say empty things in gentle voices. She was a wonderful woman, or she'll always be with you. None of it made sense. Their mother had told them that she would be fine, even when her voice had gone hoarse and her body had become too tired to move. She had said it would be okay, and then she had disappeared into sleep, and now everyone stood around her as if waiting for something more to happen. The only one who didn't approach was a man they had never seen before. He stood some distance away near the edge of the tree line, far enough that most might not have noticed him at all. But the girls did. All three. They saw him arrive, stepping from a sleek black car with tinted windows, his hands buried in the pockets of a long gray coat. His face was pale, starkly pale in contrast to the sea of darker complexions around him. His eyes were shaded by the brim of his hat, but he stood like someone who had come with a reason, though no one acknowledged him. The girls didn't speak of him aloud, but their small shoulders tensed all the same. He did not look like a mourner, not the way others wept or held one another. He looked like a ghost who had found his way back to a place he no longer belonged. The funeral service proceeded with formal words, spoken by a minister who had never known Adil, but had been paid to say the right things. Marina, their mother's sister, stood nearest the casket. She was a woman of discipline and presence, with lines of responsibility carved into her face. Since Adil's passing 2 days earlier, she had taken charge of everything: the funeral arrangements, the phone calls, the food, the girls. She had not cried in front of them once. When the final prayer ended and the first handfuls of dirt were dropped onto the casket, the man stepped forward. It was not a grand gesture, nor was it even noticed by many. He approached slowly, his eyes not meeting anyone's, a folded envelope in his hand. He paused at the foot of the grave, hesitated, then placed the envelope atop the fresh wood, nestled between lilies and roses. Then he turned, walked back the way he had come, and disappeared behind the trees without a word. Marina saw him. Her spine straightened like a rod of steel as he moved. Her lips pressed tight, her jaw tense. When he was gone, she stepped forward briskly and retrieved the envelope, stuffing it into her coat as if it burned her hand. The girls saw it all. They said nothing as they were led away from the cemetery, their gloved hands wrapped in Marina's as she shepherded them to the car. But Kira turned once, looking back to the trees. Naomi clung to Marina's side, unsure why the man's face stayed in her mind more than the service itself. Leah simply watched, storing every detail like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Back at the house, the air was too still. The walls seemed to press inward without the presence of their mother's quiet humming, without the scent of her rosewater perfume lingering in the hallway. Her absence was not just in the bed she no longer occupied or the empty chair at the kitchen table. It was in the way no one dared turn on the radio, in how dinner was served without laughter or stories. The girls sat on the couch with plates of food they did not want. Marina moved through the rooms like someone fulfilling a role rather than living it, her grief hidden beneath order. The house was clean, too clean, stripped of the messiness that had once made it feel like home. In the evening, when the windows reflected darkness and the only sounds were the occasional car passing outside, Marina knelt before the girls and explained that she would be taking care of them now. She had already filed for guardianship. There was no one else, she said. They would be okay. Mommy loved them, and so did she. Naomi asked softly, "But what about the man in the trees?" Marina froze for only a second. Then she smiled too quickly and brushed a hand over Naomi's curls. "No one important," she said, "just someone passing through." Kira frowned. "He left something on Mommy's casket. You took it." Marina's eyes cooled. "It wasn't for you to worry about. Some things aren't meant for children." Later, after the dishes were washed and the house was quiet again, Marina sat alone in her sister's room. She held the envelope in her lap, but hadn't opened it. Her fingers trembled. After a long time, she slid a letter opener beneath the red wax seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. Her eyes scanned it quickly, then again, slower. Her face did not soften. She set it down and exhaled. Her voice, when she spoke aloud to the empty room, was low and bitter. "You don't get to come back now." She burned the letter in the fireplace. Upstairs, in their shared room, the girls lay side by side in one bed. Kira clutched the stuffed lion their mother had sewn for her. Naomi whispered to the ceiling, asking where Mommy had gone. Leah didn't sleep. Her mind replayed the funeral, the man's coat, the way Marina had moved like a soldier guarding a secret. "Do you think he knew her?" Naomi asked softly. Kira rolled over. "He was crying." "No, he wasn't," Leah said. "He didn't cry. He didn't look sad, just like he didn't belong." Kira was quiet a moment. "He was white. Like really white," Naomi added, "like pale." "Do you think he's our daddy?" Leah whispered. Kira's breath caught. "No," she said quickly, "Mommy would have told us." But none of them slept easy, and outside, beneath a moon half hidden by clouds, a black car drove away from the town of Elmbrook for the second time in 7 years. This time, it left behind something heavier than it had carried in. Not guilt, not hope, but the quiet realization that some doors, once closed, do not open again, not by force, not by desire. Only, sometimes, by the children left standing behind them. In the days that followed the funeral, a new kind of quiet settled over the house. It was not the respectful hush of mourning or the hushed stillness of ceremony. It was the thick, pressing silence of something unfinished. The house on Maple Street once filled with the subtle sounds of their mother's humming, of pages turning in the evening and pots clinking on the stove, now echoed with absences. The walls had begun to absorb the weight of all that was unsaid, and though the rooms were warm, they felt colder than they ever had before. Marina moved through the house like a shadow with purpose. She kept the girls on a rigid schedule. Breakfast was at 7, brushing teeth by 7:15, lessons at 8, lunch at noon, quiet time at 1, reading at 3, and dinner exactly at 6. The rhythm was efficient, precise, and devoid of the softness the girls had known with Adele. Where their mother had folded routine into comfort, Marina imposed it like a law. She loved them, that much was clear, but love, when filtered through her need for control, lost its gentleness. The girls, unused to the new order, responded in ways as different as their personalities. Kira, the oldest by 4 minutes and the natural leader, pushed back first. She questioned everything. Why did they have to eat cereal instead of pancakes? Why couldn't they sleep with the nightlight on anymore? Why had the books in the living room been boxed away and replaced with Marina's files and folders? She dug into closets, opened drawers that Marina had closed, and prowled through the attic with a flashlight when she thought no one was listening. Her restlessness came not from defiance, but from a sense that something important had been left unsaid, and she wasn't willing to let it stay buried. Laya withdrew. She spoke less, smiled less, and watched more. Her eyes became sharper, her silences more thoughtful. She noticed things: how Marina stiffened every time someone mentioned their mother, how she flinched at the ring of the telephone, how her hand trembled just slightly when she poured tea. Naomi retreated inward. She filled notebook after notebook with drawings of their mother, of their old bedroom, of the man from the cemetery. Her sketches were always in pencil, soft and smudged, as if the edges of her memories were already beginning to fade. She drew him tall, pale, always with his head slightly bowed. She had never seen his eyes, but she imagined they were blue. On the 4th night after the funeral, Kira climbed out of bed and opened the drawer of their mother's old nightstand. Marina had left the bedroom mostly untouched, but she had boxed up some of the papers and books that had cluttered the space. Kira, determined, rooted through the contents with quiet fingers. She found a jewelry box, a dried flower pressed between 2 pages of a novel, and a photo album wrapped in a scarf that still smelled faintly of rosewater and mint. She carried the album back to the bedroom they now shared and opened it under the blanket, flashlight balanced between her knees. Leah sat up, silent but alert. Naomi rolled over and peered with wide eyes. The first few pages were familiar. Pictures of the girls as babies, wrapped in pink blankets and nestled in their mother's arms. Photos from birthdays, from holidays, from trips to the park. But as Kira flipped further, she noticed gaps. Pages had been carefully emptied, as if photos had been removed. In some, there were visible outlines where pictures had once been. One photo remained, tucked between 2 pages that stuck together. It was of Adele, younger, laughing in a cafe. A man's arm was draped around her shoulders, but the rest of him had been cut out of the picture. Kira's breath caught. She turned the picture over. There was no writing on the back. "I knew it," she whispered. "Knew what?" Naomi asked sleepily. Kira handed the photo to Leah. "That man from the funeral, he knew Mommy." Naomi sat up. "You think it was him?" Why would she cut him out of the pictures if he wasn't important? Kira's voice trembled. Why would Marina hide the letter he left? Leah didn't answer, but her fingers ran over the edge of the photo as if trying to trace the missing face. The next day, As Marina supervised their morning lessons, Leah was the one who broke the silence. "Why don't we have a dad?" Marina's pen froze above her planner. The clock ticked loudly in the pause that followed. "What kind of question is that?" she said finally. "Other kids at the center have dads," Leah continued. "We never even talk about ours." Marina shut her planner. "Because you don't have one. Your mother raised you on her own. She chose to." Kira narrowed her eyes. "That man from the funeral, he left a letter. You took it." Marina's voice became sharper. "That man is no one. You girls need to focus on what's in front of you, not on ghosts." "We're not babies," Kira shot back. "We can tell when something's wrong." Naomi clutched her sketchbook. "He looked like me," she said quietly. The silence that followed was too long. Marina stood slowly. "I won't tolerate this kind of talk. You're children. There are things you don't need to know." She left the room and the door closed behind her with a finality that sent a chill through them. Later that afternoon, Leah sat by the window seat, gazing out at the trees swaying in the wind. She thought about what she'd seen at the funeral, the way the man had looked at the casket, not with tears, but with a gaze that felt too deep for a stranger. He hadn't cried, but he had been there. That meant something. She remembered a moment from when she was 4. Her mother had been in the kitchen, speaking on the phone in French, a language they'd never heard from her before, one she never used again. At the time, she thought little of it. Now, she wasn't sure. That memory returned, vivid and strange. Kira had gone back to the attic. This time, she found a cardboard box labeled University. Inside were folders, notebooks, and a stack of old letters tied with string. Some were addressed to Adil. Others, unopened, bore foreign stamps and careful handwriting. One was signed E.M. She didn't understand most of the words, but the return address caught her attention. Sorbonne Université, Paris. That night, the girls huddled under the covers, the box between them. "What if he's still there?" Naomi asked. "In France." Kira nodded slowly. "Then we'll find him." Leah frowned. "How?" "We write him a letter," Kira said, "just like he did." "We don't know where he lives," Leah countered. "He worked at that school," Kira said, holding up the envelope. "Maybe they know." Naomi was already reaching for her sketchbook. "Let's do it, just to know." And so, with a sheet of lined paper and their best handwriting, the letter began. It was short, full of simple words, and carefully unsigned. They didn't say who they were, only that they believed he had known someone named Adil, and that they had questions. Kira sealed the letter and addressed it to the university. They gave it to Mrs. Evelyn, the newspaper vendor down the street who always gave them butterscotch candy. She didn't ask questions. She slipped the letter into the pile of her outgoing mail and winked. "Don't let Marina know," Kira whispered. Mrs. Evelyn smiled. "I never saw a thing." That night, as the wind howled outside and the old house creaked, the 3 girls lay awake. Kira stared at the ceiling, her arms folded behind her head. Leah counted the seconds between gusts of wind. Naomi clutched her sketchbook to her chest, the newest drawn hidden inside, a man in a gray coat, standing alone beneath bare trees. They had written the letter. Now they would wait. The letter had been sent, slipped into the hands of Mrs. Evelyn with all the ceremony 6-year-olds could muster, sealed with a stamp borrowed from Marina's desk, addressed to a place they had only seen in old envelopes and imagined as a city made entirely of lights and rivers. Paris. The name itself tasted like a fairy tale, like something from a bedtime story their mother might have told them if she'd ever spoken about the past. But she hadn't. She'd given them stories with dragons and starships and flying trees, but never the ones that ended in real names or real people. Especially not about the man who might have been their father. In the first few days after sending the letter, the girls lived in a state of expectation. Every knock at the door, every rustle of the mail slot sent them scampering to the hallway, breath caught in their throats. But there was nothing. Only bills and catalogs, a postcard from a cousin Marina never liked, and once a political flyer that Kira tore in half without reading. Marina watched them with narrowed eyes. They had grown more secretive, whispering in corners, huddling over pieces of paper, and retreating into their room with the kind of coordination only trios of siblings seemed capable of maintaining. She assumed it was part of their grieving process, or perhaps something more childishly seditious. She didn't yet suspect the letter, but she was growing less patient with what she called their moodiness. On the fifth night after they sent the letter, Marina confiscated Naomi's sketchbook after seeing a new drawing of the pale man from the funeral. She didn't say much, just that it was time to stop imagining things and focus on what was real. Naomi hadn't cried, but she had gone silent in that long, floating way she did sometimes, as if detaching herself from the room entirely. It was Kira who said what none of them wanted to admit. What if he never writes back? Leah looked up from the windowsill where she had been watching a squirrel chase its reflection across the glass. We don't know if the letter even got there. He got our first one, Naomi whispered. He must have. But that wasn't ours, that was his, Kira said, and Marina burned it. He knew Mommy, Naomi said, quietly insistent. Yeah, Kira muttered, and he left. The silence after that was heavy. He had left. Whether by choice or ignorance, that fact didn't change. He had not stayed. He had not come to the door. He had not spoken to them, only left a folded envelope on a wooden box and vanished into the trees. 2 more days passed. The weather turned. Cold rain began to fall in long, slanting sheets, and the house seemed to shrink under the noise of it. The girls spent more time inside, gathered in their headquarters under the table in their room, where pillows and blankets formed walls in secrecy. They took turns peeking down the hall during mail delivery, recording what came and what didn't in Leah's investigation journal. Kira began sketching a map of possibilities. If he didn't answer from Paris, then maybe he had moved to another part of France. Or maybe he wasn't in France at all. Maybe he'd gone back to the place he was born. Maybe he had another family. The thought twisted in her chest, but she drew the line anyway. Naomi made a new picture. This one showed 3 girls standing in front of a man whose face was still blank, undefined, as if she didn't dare give it features until they were sure. She drew a bridge behind them and stars above. She called it Maybe. Marina remained busy. She had returned to part-time work as a speech therapist, and when she was home, she oscillated between stern efficiency and exhausted silence. The girls watched her closely, learning when to ask questions and when to disappear. Marina was not cruel, but she was tired. They had begun to see it in the sag of her shoulders, the new lines by her mouth. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, after the girls had returned from their library hour, that Marina sat them down unexpectedly in the kitchen. Her hands were folded on the table. The light through the window made her look older than she had the week before. "I want to talk to you about something," she said. The girls looked at each other, then sat. "I know you've been asking questions," she said, looking at Leah, "about your father." The air went still. Naomi's hands curled into her sleeves. Kira tensed. I think it's time I tell you what I know." She didn't sugarcoat it. Marina didn't do softness well. She told them about Adil's time at university, how she'd met a visiting scholar from France, a man who studied comparative literature and spoke with a quiet, deliberate voice. His name had been Emil. He'd come for a year, maybe 2. She wasn't sure exactly. They had met at a campus event, started talking about poetry, of all things. Things moved quickly. Adil was young. Emil was charming, brilliant in a quiet way, but he had always said he would be returning to France, that his future wasn't here. Marina had never liked him. Not because of who he was, necessarily, but because of what he represented. Something fleeting, something rooted in imagination and not responsibility. Adil had believed he might stay, but he hadn't. He left, and shortly after, she found out she was pregnant. She chose not to tell him, Marina said. She didn't want him to feel trapped, or maybe she didn't want to be hurt again. "But he didn't even know about us?" Naomi asked, her voice thin. "No," Marina said softly. "Not then." The girls sat in stunned quiet. Kira frowned. "Why didn't she ever say anything to us?" "She wanted you to grow up whole, without waiting for someone who might never come back." "She still kept his letters?" Leah murmured. Marina sighed. She was allowed her memories. That doesn't mean she wanted to change what she chose. Naomi lowered her eyes. "He left anyway." Kira stared at the tabletop. He still should have come back. The conversation ended there. Marina rose, kissed the tops of their heads, an unusual gesture, and went to start dinner. The girls didn't follow her. That night, the headquarters under the table was filled with silence, until Kira spoke. "He didn't leave us on purpose." Leah nodded slowly, but he didn't come back either. "We sent the letter," Naomi said. "He has to answer. If he knows, he'll want to." Leah looked at her sister, at the hopeful set of her mouth, at the faint shimmer in her eyes, and she lied. "Maybe he already wrote back," she said. "Maybe it's just late." The others nodded. That was enough for now. What they didn't know, what even Marina wouldn't know until weeks later, was that their letter had made it. It had traveled across the ocean, sorted through hands that didn't recognize its quiet importance, and found its way to a dusty mailbox in the administrative wing of a centuries-old building in Paris. But the man it was addressed to no longer lived there. He had left his position months ago, quietly and with no forwarding address. His office was empty. His name had been removed from the faculty list. Only a few colleagues remembered him at all. The envelope sat for days on a desk before someone filed it away in a bin marked Unknown Recipient. It might have ended there. But fate, in its winding ways, rarely obeys such tidy resolutions. One of Emil's former students, now a clerk in the archives, saw the letter and the name and remembered. He didn't know where Emil had gone, but he remembered him mentioning a town in America once, a woman he had cared for, a name, a deal. The clerk, moved by something he didn't quite understand, took the letter home and began to search. The days bled into one another with the gray sameness of early winter. The first snow had fallen and melted in a single afternoon, leaving the ground damp and cold, as if nature itself had paused, uncertain whether to move forward or retreat. In the house on Maple Street, the air carried a strange stillness, and the girls moved through their routines like figures in a slow, deliberate dance. The letter they had sent weeks before remained a secret among them, wrapped in hope that had begun to fray at the edges. They no longer rushed to the door at the sound of the mail slot. They no longer whispered as frequently beneath the blankets at night. Their little flame of belief had not gone out, but it had dimmed. Marina noticed the shift. She had begun to loosen her grip on their schedule, allowing the occasional variation, a later breakfast on Saturdays, a walk to the library even when it was cold. It wasn't softness exactly, but something close to recognition. She understood that grief was not linear, that children mourned in waves, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with silence. She tried in her own way to meet them where they were, but she didn't press. She didn't speak again of Emil, or the girl's father, or the letter she had burned. The subject lay buried under snowdrifts of unspoken things. Then, one morning in early December, the mailbox held something new. It was Leah who found it. The others were inside, tangled in a half-hearted board game, their interest already waning. Leah had volunteered to check the mail, more out of habit than hope. She opened the creaking lid, shuffled through the usual bills and coupons, and froze. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, with the kind of texture that felt expensive to the touch. Her name wasn't on it, but she knew. She knew. The return address was written in a Lupin, careful script that she couldn't read, but the postmark said France. Her heart kicked against her ribs. She closed the mailbox slowly, tucked the envelope under her sweater, and walked back to the house like someone balancing glass. They didn't open it right away. In their room, behind the closed door, with the old quilt pulled over their heads, they held the envelope between them like a sacred object. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The girls stared at it for a long time. Finally, Kira broke the seal with a slow, reverent motion. Inside was a single page, written in careful English, the kind that spoke of foreign schools and translation guides. The words were short and formal. To whom it may concern, I'm writing in response to a letter I received at the university where I used to work. The letter mentioned someone named Adele. I did know an Adele many years ago. She was important to me. If you are writing on her behalf or are related to her, please know that I remember her with deep respect. I am no longer at the university. I live now in the countryside near Lyon. I do not know what the purpose of your letter was, but if you have questions, I will answer as best I can. E. Maurier. There was no more. Kira read it 3 times. Leah twice. Naomi whispered the words under her breath as if trying to memorize the sound of them. There was nothing in the letter to confirm anything. No mention of children, no acknowledgement of the possibility. But he had answered. He had read their letter and chosen to respond. That, in itself, was a shift in the world. We have to write him again, Kira said at once. We have to tell him who we are. Leah hesitated. But what if he doesn't want to know? He said we could ask questions, Naomi said. So we ask. He might not believe us. Kira's voice hardened. Then we make him. But they didn't write him again that day, or the next. The letter sat in Naomi's drawer beneath the worn pages of her sketchbook while they tried to figure out what to say. The truth had never been so close or so uncertain. It was no longer a fantasy. It was a man with a name and a place on a map. Marina noticed the change in their energy. Something had reignited in them. They spoke in whispers again. They snuck a paper from the drawer she kept for bills. Naomi began drawing more. Images of a house with vines on the walls, of a man reading beneath a tree, of 3 girls standing in the doorway. One night, as she passed their room on her way to bed, Marina paused outside the door. She heard Kira say, "If he says no, if he doesn't want us, then what?" There was a pause. "Then we still know," Naomi said, "and he does too." Marina walked away. The next morning, she called them to the kitchen after breakfast. They sat, cautious, unsure of her mood. "I need to tell you something else," she said. The girls tensed. Marina took a long breath. "I knew about the letter, the first one. I found the envelope you took." No one spoke. "I didn't stop you because part of me thought maybe he should know, but I also wanted to protect you from disappointment, from more hurt." "We're not hurt," Kira said. "We just want to know the truth." Marina looked at her niece, so young and already so sure. "The truth isn't always simple, but it matters." Marina nodded. "Yes, it does." She stood, walked to the drawer, and returned with something in her hand. It was a small, flat box. She placed it on the table. "These were your mother's," she said. "I didn't show you before because I wasn't ready, but I think you are." Inside the box were letters, real letters, dozens of them folded and yellowing, some tied with ribbon, others loose, all addressed to Adil, all from Emil. The girls leaned forward as if drawn by a magnet. Marina didn't speak again. She left them with the box and a silent nod. They spent hours reading. The letters were full of poetry and philosophy, and the kind of language none of them fully understood, but they understood enough. Emil had loved her, deeply, completely, and she had loved him. There were hints of longing, of distance, of promises that wavered, and then, near the end, a letter that stopped them cold. "I wish you would write me back. I don't understand your silence. I know I said I couldn't stay, but I didn't mean I wanted to leave us. I would have come back, Adil, if I had known." There was no response. "He didn't know," Leah said. Kira's eyes burned. "She didn't tell him." "She was afraid," Naomi said, "of what it would mean." They wrote a new letter that night. This time they signed it. "Dear Emil, we are Kira, Leah, and Naomi. We are 6 years old. Our mother's name was Adil. She died last month. We think you are our father. She never told you, but now you know. We want to talk to you. We don't want anything else, just to know who you are, to know if we came from you too. We live in Elmbrook, in the United States, with our Aunt Marina. Please write back." They mailed it together, all three of them, walking to the postbox under a sky that threatened snow. Kira held the envelope tightly, her fingers clenched around the edges. Leah reached up and opened the lid. Naomi dropped it in. None of them spoke on the way home. The silence was not heavy now, it was expectant. And somewhere, on the other side of the world, a man who had once stood at the edge of a grave now sat alone at a kitchen table, a pile of letters before him and a name echoing in his chest that had never left him. Not truly, not ever. The snow came heavy that week. Thick, wet flakes that clung to rooftops and power lines, coating everything in a cold hush that muffled the world. The girls pressed their hands to the window panes and watched the town slow to a crawl beneath its new white blanket. Cars moved cautiously along the salted roads. The postman wore extra layers and a plastic cover on his cap, and the dog across the street, usually so vocal, barked only once before retreating into its yard. In the house on Maple Street, the radiators hissed and popped, and the scent of cinnamon had begun to drift faintly from the tea Marina now made in the afternoons. It had been 9 days since they sent their second letter to Emil. The girls had not expected a reply so quickly, and perhaps for that reason they had not spoken of it much, not aloud. But it was there, in the way Kira paused each time she passed the hallway table, in the way Leah kept peering through the front curtains, and in how Naomi had begun to draw the same house over and over again. A house that did not exist in Elmbrook, with shutters painted blue and a garden of lavender below the windows. They were waiting, each in their own way, and though none of them said it, they knew something had shifted. The truth had been spoken. The veil was gone. There was no more pretending, no more silence. Emil knew. They had told him. It was the 12th day when the doorbell rang. Marina had gone to the market, bundled in scarf and gloves and a coat that had belonged to their mother. The girls were home alone, not in the forbidden sense, but in the way that happens when you live in a house small enough for rules to bend. Kira was helping Naomi glue construction paper into a collage of imagined landscapes, and Leah had taken it upon herself to reorganize the bookshelf alphabetically, which she insisted made more sense than sorting by color as Marina had done. The sound of the bell startled them all. It was firm, deliberate, not the sharp ring of a delivery man in a rush, nor the impatient buzz of a neighbor. They looked at each other. Kira stood first. At the door sat a box, not large, but substantial. Square, wrapped in brown paper, the corners sealed with old-fashioned twine. There was no postage, no stamps, no address, only a small white card taped to the top bearing 3 names written in black ink: Kira, Leah, and Naomi. They carried it inside like a treasure, reverently, fingers brushing the twine but not yet pulling. On the coffee table they gathered around it, kneeling on the rug as if around a campfire. Naomi's hands hovered just above the edge. "Is it from him?" she whispered. "It has to be," Kira said, but her voice had lost its usual certainty. Leah peeled away the tape carefully, untying the string in a single pull. The paper fell away, revealing a plain white box beneath. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside were 3 smaller boxes, nestled in folds of tissue paper, each wrapped in soft gray cloth. They were identical in size and shape, and each had a small tag attached by ribbon. Kira's name, Leah's, Naomi's, no letter, no explanation. The girls stared, then opened them all at once. Inside each box lay a necklace, a thin silver chain with a small pendant, oval-shaped and engraved with delicate lines. In the center of each pendant, embedded flush with the metal, was a tiny pressed flower, so small it could have been mistaken for paint, until Naomi touched it and gasped at the texture. "Real?" she whispered. "It's real." They looked almost the same, but not quite. Kira's flower was deep violet, Leah's pale blue, Naomi's soft yellow. Turned over, each pendant had an engraving on the back. The words were simple. In Kira's, "You are brave." In Leah's, "You are wise." In Naomi's, "You are light." Naomi began to cry first. Silently, without sobs or sound, the tears sliding down her cheeks as she clutched the pendant to her chest. Kira's fingers trembled. Leah stared so long her vision blurred. There was no card to explain them, no signature. But it didn't matter. There was no doubt. He had answered. When Marina returned, dusted with snow and arms full of groceries, she found the girls sitting together on the couch, their new necklaces glinting softly against their sweaters, the empty box open on the table like a secret revealed. She didn't ask who had delivered it. She didn't scold them for opening the door. She only looked at the pendants, her face unreadable. "Where did it come from?" she asked softly. "We think from him," Kira said. Marina looked at them a long time. Then, without a word, she walked to the fireplace and sat down on the hearth, her back to them. Later that evening, after the dishes had been washed and the house had quieted, Marina called the girls into the living room. They came slowly, unsure if they were in trouble or if something else was unfolding. She didn't stand. She didn't even look up right away. "When your mother was pregnant," she said, "she made a decision. Not out of anger, not even out of pride, but because she was scared. The girl sat on the floor. She thought he had chosen a different life. She thought telling him would make everything harder. For her, for you, maybe even for him. Naomi held her pendant between her fingers. Do you think she was wrong? Marina's voice was quiet. I think she did what she thought was best. There was a long pause. She never wanted you to grow up with questions, but she didn't know how to give you answers either. Do you think he wanted to know? Leah asked. I think, Marina said, finally turning to look at them, he did. The next morning, the girls wore their necklaces to the breakfast table. Marina said nothing, but something about the way she placed their plates in front of them was different, gentler perhaps, or simply less guarded. The mail came late that day. Naomi was the one who fetched it. This time there was a letter. A single envelope addressed to all three of them in the same looping script as before. She ran back inside, the cold forgotten. They read it together on the rug. My dear girls, I received your letter. I read it many times. I did not know. I did not know about you, and that is something I will regret for the rest of my life. Your mother was the most extraordinary person I have ever known. She was the reason I believed in the goodness of the world. I wanted to stay, but my circumstances then made it difficult. When she stopped writing to me, I thought I had lost her forever. To learn that she had daughters, that I have daughters, is something I still struggle to believe. But I believe you. I do not know what you want from me. I cannot change the past, but I want to know you. I want to understand the lives you've lived, what you love, what makes you laugh. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm simply asking for a beginning. With all my heart, Emil. They read it once, then again, and again. By the third time, Naomi had begun to giggle through her tears, and Kira had leaned her head against Leah's shoulder. They didn't know what came next. They didn't know if they would ever meet him, or what he would be like in person. But now they knew he wanted to try. And that was enough. That night, Naomi drew a new picture. 3 girls on a hilltop beneath a sky full of stars. Below them, a winding road that led toward a small house with blue shutters and a light in the window. There was a figure in the doorway, not faceless this time, but still indistinct. Not yet real, not yet theirs. But maybe soon. The snow held through the end of December, blanketing Elmbrook in a stillness that softened the edges of everything. School had ended for the holidays, and the girls found themselves with long hours to fill. The rhythm of their days became quieter, more reflective. They no longer counted the days between letters, no longer hovered near the window each morning, or waited in hushed anticipation beside the mailbox. Emil had written. He had sent them something beautiful. He had responded not just once, but with the sincerity of someone who had felt the shift inside himself, someone who, though far away, had chosen not to remain a stranger. And in choosing that, he had become something else. Not a father, not yet, but not the absence he had always been. He had become real. The girls responded to his letter carefully, as if afraid to shatter the tentative bridge they had begun to build. They told him about their school, their favorite colors, the stories their mother used to tell. Kira described the books she loved to read, mostly stories about clever girls with swords and secrets. Leah wrote about the stars and her fascination with maps and puzzles, how she liked knowing where things belonged. Naomi sent a drawing of the 3 of them beneath a flowering tree that did not exist in winter, but had bloomed often in their mother's stories. Marina helped them translate some of their thoughts into simple French phrases at their insistence. They wanted to try to meet him halfway. In return, Emil sent photographs. They arrived in a white envelope with a single word on the back: Pour vous. There were no explanations, just a series of images, candid and carefully chosen. Emil standing beside a river with the snow along the banks, his coat buttoned to the collar, his smile hesitant but warm. Emil seated in a chair by a small fireplace, a book open on his lap. Emil in a garden, likely spring or summer, holding a cluster of small flowers in one hand and what looked like a sketch pad in the other. The girls examined each photo with the intensity of detectives. They compared the lines of his face to their own, searching for signs. The shape of Naomi's nose, the arch of Leah's brows, the thoughtful crease in Kira's forehead when she concentrated. They found pieces. It was Leah who said it first, one quiet afternoon as they folded laundry together. "I think I believe him," she said, her voice almost too soft to hear. Naomi looked up. "Me too." Kira hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." It wasn't about evidence anymore. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about knowing and feeling known in return. As the holidays passed, their lives returned to their familiar routines. But there was a difference now, a quiet current running beneath everything. The world was not just what was visible inside the house or in Elmbrook. There was a new dimension to their days, a distant thread of connection stretched across an ocean, invisible but sure. One evening, as Marina prepared dinner, she noticed that the girls had set the table without being asked. Not just the plates and forks, but folded napkins, a centerpiece of pine cones and candles. When she commented, Kira shrugged. "Mom used to do it this way," she said. Marina didn't argue. She simply stirred the pot on the stove, her back turned so they wouldn't see her face. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Marina sat by the window, turning a letter over in her hands. It was one of Emil's, one of the old ones Adil had kept. She hadn't read it before. She hadn't read any of them in years, but something about the way the girls had begun to carry themselves made her reach for it. The letter was simple. Emil wrote about missing Adil's voice, about a dream he had in which they walked through a bookstore in silence, touching the spines of old novels. He ended the letter with a single line: "I think part of my heart is in your pocket, waiting to be remembered." Marina folded it carefully and returned it to the box. She didn't cry. She rarely did, but something in her chest softened, a quiet loosening she had not expected. The next day, she took the girls to the botanical garden outside town. It was a strange trip, given the cold, but the greenhouses were open and warm inside, filled with tropical plants and borrowed sunlight. As they walked the winding paths, Naomi stopped in front of a tree with wide green leaves and small white blooms. "Mama used to talk about a tree like this," she said. "Frangipani," said Marina, reading the tag aloud. She loved the smell. Kira stepped closer, her eyes narrowed. "She once told me it grew near her university. She said she used to sit under it when she wrote." They stood quietly for a moment, all four of them. Marina reached out, almost without realizing, and touched the petals gently. When they returned home, Marina brought out a small box from the hall closet. It had been sealed with tape years ago, labeled simply Adil. The girls watched as she opened it. Inside were more photographs, journals, a scarf, a tiny music box, and a notebook filled with poems written in their mother's uneven hand. Marina handed the box to them. "She wanted you to have these someday," she said. "I think it's time." That night, they read their mother's poems aloud, taking turns by the fireplace. Some were silly, rhymed lines about squirrels and teacups and moonlight. Others were fragments of something deeper, verses about loneliness, about waiting, about choosing love even when it meant being alone. There was one poem written in French. Leah struggled to translate it with Marina's help. It was about a bridge and a letter that never arrived and the belief that someday someone would cross the water. Naomi copied it into her sketchbook, surrounding it with drawings of rivers and stars. January faded into February. The snow melted slowly, then all at once. The streets turned to slush. Birds began to appear on branches again, tentative and twitching. The town stirred from its long winter sleep. And the girls, too, began to move differently. They no longer whispered about Emil. He had become a fact of their lives, not a secret. They spoke of him openly, sometimes with questions, sometimes with longing, but always with a kind of peace. They wore their necklaces often, though not always. They began to speak of him not as the man from the funeral, or our maybe dad, but simply Emil. One Sunday afternoon, as they worked on a school project about family traditions, Naomi asked if they could include something from Emil's letters. "We don't have a tradition with him," Kira pointed out. "Not yet," Leah said, "but maybe we will." They included a copy of one of his photos and a quote he had written in his second letter. "Family is not always who you start with. Sometimes it's who you meet along the way." Their teacher called Marina the next day, surprised and touched. Marina said only, "They're learning to define things for themselves." As spring approached, the girls began to ask fewer questions, not because their curiosity had lessened, but because some of the answers had already begun to bloom inside them. They had accepted the shape of their story. It was not symmetrical, it was not tidy, but it was theirs. And that was enough. On the first warm day of March, they planted a flower in the yard. Marina helped them clear the soil. Naomi chose the spot. Kira pressed the roots gently into the earth. Leah placed a small stone marker beside it. The flower was white. They didn't name it or dedicate it. They didn't need to. It would grow, like them, and in its own time, it would bloom. The day Emil arrived in Elmbrook, the rain came soft and steady, like a hush drawn across the sky. It was not the kind of rain that howled or demanded to be noticed. It fell with quiet purpose, washing the dust from the sidewalks, leaving behind a sheen of silver on the rooftops and pavement. The town held its breath in a way that felt coincidental but meaningful, as if the clouds themselves were reluctant to speak too loudly, to interfere with whatever was about to unfold. Marina had spent the morning in a kind of still activity, moving from room to room without quite finishing anything. She straightened picture frames that didn't need straightening, refolded the dish towels, changed the water in the vase of lilies on the windowsill. The girls were unusually subdued, each absorbed in their own small rituals of anticipation. Naomi had chosen her outfit 3 times, and finally settled on a dress their mother had once sewn for her, its hem now a little too short, but beloved nonetheless. Leah had gone to the library in search of a book about France, and returned with 2, reading them both silently in the corner. Kira had written and rewritten a page of questions, folded it into her pocket, then taken it out again and torn it into pieces. No one said aloud what they were waiting for. It wasn't necessary. They had not made a sign. There were no banners, no balloons. This was not a birthday or a reunion or a spectacle. This was something else, something that lived outside the bounds of language and event. This was the slow opening of a door that had been shut for too long. He was due to arrive at 1:30. Marina had offered to pick him up from the small bus station just outside town, but he had declined. He wanted to walk, he had written. He wanted time to feel the ground under his feet, to see the town she had lived in, the streets their daughters had walked, the house that had held her memory. When the knock came, it was soft, a knock without assumption. Marina opened the door and stood there for a long moment, unmoving. Emil stood beneath the overhang, hat in his hands, his coat damp from the rain. He had not aged beyond recognition. His letters had prepared them for the gray in his beard, the lines beside his eyes. But there was a stillness in his presence that the girls had not imagined. He looked as though he were holding his breath. "I didn't know if you'd really come," Marina said finally. "I wasn't sure either," Emil replied. They regarded one another for a moment longer. Then Marina stepped aside. He entered without a sound, the wetness of his coat leaving faint marks on the floor. The girls waited in the living room, lined up on the couch as if for a portrait they had not yet agreed to pose for. Naomi sat in the center, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Leah's feet barely touched the floor, her book open but unread beside her. Kira had positioned herself at the end, back straight, eyes level. Emil stepped into the room and paused. The silence felt fragile, but it was not awkward. It was dense with the weight of everything they did not know how to say. Then, softly, Emil spoke. "You must be Naomi." Naomi blinked, then nodded. "Yes. And Leah." She raised her hand in a small wave. "Hi." He turned to the third. "Kira." She met his eyes. "That's me." There was another pause, and then he smiled. Not a grand smile, not the kind designed for pictures or pleasantries, but a small, sincere curve of the mouth, filled with quiet awe. "I have thought about this moment," he said, "for a long time, even before I knew it could happen." None of the girls moved. They watched him as if afraid he might dissolve. "I don't know what to say," Naomi admitted. "That's all right," Emil said gently. "Neither do I." He sat when Marina offered him a chair, though it was clear he would have remained standing all day if no one had spoken. They talked in starts and stops. Emil asked questions about their school, their favorite subjects, their friends. The girls answered politely at first, cautiously. He told them a little about his life, about the village where he lived, about the small garden he tended, and the lectures he still gave occasionally at the university in Lyon. Kira asked if he had any pets. He did not, but there was a cat who visited his garden sometimes, a gray one with a torn ear. Naomi asked if he remembered the music their mother used to listen to. He did. He had a record of one of the composers still, and sometimes played it on Sunday mornings. Leah asked the hardest question. "Why didn't you come before?" Emil folded his hands in his lap. "Because I didn't know," he said. "And then, when I finally did, I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" she asked, not unkindly. "Afraid that it would be too late." They sat with that truth, not accepting it, but acknowledging it. They did not rush to fill the silence that followed. In that, they were more like their mother than they realized. Later, Marina brought out tea and the sugar cookies Naomi had baked the day before. Emil took one politely, but did not eat it. His hands trembled slightly, and he kept them folded around his cup like an anchor. When the girls stepped out into the backyard to give the adults space, Marina remained seated across from him. She studied his face in a way she hadn't allowed herself to do when he first arrived. "She loved you, you know," she said. "I loved her too," he said, "and I never stopped." "She never told you about the girls." He shook his head. "No, not once." "She thought she was sparing you." He closed his eyes for a moment, a flicker of pain passing across his face. "She was wrong," he said, "but I understand." Outside, the girls wandered the path near the flower they had planted in March. It was still small, but the buds were firm, resilient. Naomi knelt beside it and traced the petals with her fingertip. "He's real," she said softly. "Yeah," Kira said. "He's real." "Do you think he'll come back?" Leah asked. "He came now," Naomi said. "That's something." Marina gave Emil a room to stay the night, the guest room that had once been a nursery and then a storage space, and now felt strangely like a waiting place. He didn't have luggage, just a shoulder bag with a book, a change of clothes, and an old photograph of a deal tucked into a leather wallet. That evening, he read aloud from a book the girls had never heard of, something in French that made Naomi giggle and Kira roll her eyes but smile nonetheless. Leah followed along carefully, asking for translations every few lines. He showed them how to pronounce his name properly, and Naomi tried it 3 times before giving up and calling him Monsieur Papa, which made Emil laugh in a way that surprised even him. Before bed, Kira hesitated in the hallway. She stood near the guest room door, fidgeting. Emil looked up from the chair where he was reading. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Do you want to be our dad?" The question was a stone dropped into still water. It took a moment for the ripples to reach the edges. He set the book down. "I want to be someone you can count on," he said. "Someone who's here when you need him. If you want to call that a dad, I would be honored. But you don't have to, that's up to you." She nodded, not looking at him. He added, "Your mother would be proud of you. All of you. She would have loved to see you today." Kira turned and walked back toward her room without another word. But the next morning, when he came down for breakfast, all 3 girls were wearing their necklaces again. They sat around the table, eating toast with jam, and Marina poured coffee into his mug as though he'd always belonged in that seat. He left that afternoon, but not without promises. Not vague ones, not the kind that people make and never keep. He promised to return. He promised to write. And this time, when he hugged them goodbye, Kira did not resist. Leah closed her eyes, and Naomi whispered, "À bientôt, Monsieur Papa." They stood on the porch long after he had walked out of sight, the rain having turned to light. In the weeks that followed, he wrote every Thursday. Sometimes long letters, sometimes postcards with pressed flowers inside. Once, he sent a recording of a lullaby he used to sing to himself as a child. Marina bought a frame for the photo of their mother that he had given them, one he had taken long ago, of her laughing in the sunlight outside a bookstore. The flower in the garden bloomed fully in April, and when the girls ran outside that morning to see it, there, hanging delicately from the stem, was a note tied with ribbon. It read simply, "Je suis ici. I'm here." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what's coming next. Check out our other videos for more powerful narratives, and if this one moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.